What if everything we thought we knew about where humans came from was wrong? For decades, we've been told the same story over and over again. Africa is the cradle of humanity. That's where it all started. That's where we came from. End of story. But what happens when a scientist holds up a crushed skull, runs it through a computer, and the machine spits out a truth that flips our entire understanding upside down? What happens when the origin story we've been telling ourselves suddenly needs a major rewrite? A recent discovery is doing exactly that. Researchers found a million-year-old skull in China, and when they digitally reconstructed it, the skull suggested something shocking. Humans might have split away from our ancient ancestors not in Africa but in Asia, and it might have happened 400,000 years earlier than we ever thought possible. This isn't just some small update to a textbook. This is the kind of discovery that makes you step back and ask the big questions. Questions about who we are, where we come from, and what it even means to be human. Part 1. The million-year-old mystery. Let's start with the skull itself. Scientists found it at a site called Yunxian in China, and it's been sitting in collections for years. But here's the thing. The skull was completely crushed. It was basically destroyed. You couldn't look at it and understand what it really was. That's where technology stepped in. Using CT scanning and computer modelling, researchers were able to digitally rebuild the skull piece by piece, as if solving the world's most ancient puzzle. And when they finally saw what they were looking at, it changed everything. This skull, called Yunxian 2, appeared to belong to a hominin. That's our scientific term for human-like creatures that lived around a million years ago. But here's where it gets interesting. The structure of the skull suggested something we didn't expect. It showed that a major split in the human family tree might have happened way earlier than our current models said it should. And more importantly, it suggested that this split might not have happened only in Africa, like we've been assuming. Part 2. The story we've been told. For the last few decades, the scientific community has been confident about one thing. Our species, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa. This is called the out of Africa model, and it's been the dominant story. It's simple, it's elegant, and for a long time the evidence seemed to back it up. The story goes like this. Africa was the birthplace of human evolution. Our ancestors lived there, evolved there, and then eventually spread out to populate the rest of the world. It's a straightforward narrative that gave us a clear answer to the question of our origins. But the thing about scientific knowledge is that sometimes it's incomplete. New evidence can show up and shake everything, and the Yunxian 2 skull is doing exactly that. It's suggesting that human evolution was messier, more complicated, and more geographically spread out than we realised. It wasn't just one place, it was more like a tangled web of different branches, all growing and changing at the same time, across different continents. Imagine the human story as a giant river. We thought it started at a single spring in Africa. This new finding suggests that maybe that river had major parallel tributaries flowing from places like Asia, much earlier than anyone thought. Part 3. When scientists have to rethink everything. Think about the feeling of being proven wrong after you were absolutely certain you were right. That moment of intellectual humility is the engine of human progress. This discovery brings us to one of the most interesting parts of how science actually works. Karl Popper, a famous philosopher of science, had this idea that science moves forward when we prove old ideas wrong. He called it falsification. You make a guess about how the world works, and then you try to prove it false. If you succeed, great, you've learned something. And if you can't prove it false, then maybe you're onto something. The Yunxian 2 skull is a perfect example of this process in action. For years, scientists have built models and timelines based on the assumption that the major splits in the human family happened in a certain way and at certain times. The new analysis of this ancient skull contradicts those assumptions. It's like someone said, actually, we need to move the date back, we need to move the location, we need to rethink the whole timeline. That's how science corrects itself. Then there's Thomas Kuhn, another philosopher who studied how science actually changes. He noticed that science doesn't move forward in a smooth, steady line. Instead, there are long periods where everyone accepts one big idea, what he called a paradigm. But then weird things start showing up, things that don't fit the model. They're called anomalies. And as more and more anomalies pile up, eventually the whole framework gets shaky. Then something happens, maybe a new discovery, maybe new technology, maybe both, that causes a complete shift in how scientists think. Kuhn called this a paradigm shift. The Yunxian 2 skull might be one of those anomalies that's starting to shake up the paradigm. For decades, the out of Africa model was the unquestioned framework, but now discoveries from Asia are appearing that make people say, wait, we need to reconsider. These discoveries don't disprove Africa's role in human evolution, but they do suggest the story is far more complicated and less Africa-centric than we thought. Part 4. What this means for human identity. Here's where things get philosophical in a really deep way. For thousands of years, philosophers have been asking what the essential quality is that makes someone human. Aristotle thought that everything had a fixed essence, a core nature that defined what it was. A chair has a chairness. A human has a humanness. We've applied this idea to our own origins, imagining a single moment in a single place where the first true human was born, possessing that magical spark of essence. But the Yunxian two-skull and other Asian finds like Homo longi, the dragon man, and the mysterious Denisovans suggest a different reality. If our lineage diverged much earlier, and if multiple distinct human-like groups were evolving simultaneously across continents, then the idea of a single fixed human nature goes right out the window. It's showing us that there wasn't one single moment where humans popped into existence. There wasn't one clear line between us and everything that came before. Instead, human evolution was a slow, messy, complicated process. Different branches of our family tree split off at different times in different places. Some of these branches led to us, some led to extinct species that our ancestors never even met. The point is, you can't point at one skull and say, this is where humanity began. It doesn't work that way. This realization is profoundly decentering in that it takes the spotlight off one location and shines it on the sheer, beautiful complexity of our shared ancestry. This idea actually supports what's called anti-essentialism. That's the view that there's no fixed human essence. Instead, humanity is something that evolved gradually over millions of years through natural processes. We're not special because we have some magic ingredient that makes us human. We're human because of a long chain of small changes that happened to our ancestors over an incredibly long time, and each change was based on survival, adaptation, and the random luck of which organisms had babies and which didn't. When you really think about it, this is kind of beautiful. It means that humanity isn't this fixed, unchanging thing. We're a process, we're a story that's still being written. And just like the Yunxian two-skull shows us, that story is more complex and more interesting than we realised. Part 5. Breaking away from simple stories. For centuries, humans have loved simple origin stories. We want a clear beginning, a moment we can point to and say that's when it started. In religious traditions, we have creation stories. In science, we had the out of Africa model. Both gave us that comfortable sense of knowing where we came from. Both gave us a single point of origin, but the universe doesn't always cooperate with our desire for simple stories. The world is complicated, reality is messy, and our origins, the real story of how humans came to be, is far more complicated than any single origin myth could capture. The researchers studying the Yunxian two-skull and fossils from this period talk about something called the muddle in the middle. They're referring to a time period between 1 million and 300,000 years ago when the fossil record gets really confusing. There are so many different human-like species living at the same time in different places. Some are in Africa, some are in Asia, some are in Europe. They're all evolving, all adapting, all branching off from each other. Which ones are our direct ancestors? Which ones are our distant cousins? Which ones went extinct? It's hard to tell. But that's closer to the truth than the simple out of Africa story ever was. Part 6. What this tells us about understanding. Unfortunately, evolutionary narratives have been twisted and misused throughout history to build cultural and racial hierarchies, using simple linear models to suggest superiority. A simple, singular origin can too easily be co-opted for a singular, superior narrative. But an older, more complex and geographically diverse origin story, one that emphasises parallel development and the intermingling of ancient lineages across continents, serves a profound philosophical purpose. It helps to dismantle those linear, single point of origin models that could support any claim of cultural or racial superiority. This new evidence forces us to embrace a pluralistic view of human beginnings. Our origins are not a single, tidy file folder, but a massive, chaotic and shared library where every continent holds an equally important chapter. It replaces the simple, teleological or purpose-driven creation story with a much richer, more naturalistic one. It tells us that the ultimate meaning of being human is not found in a fixed starting point, but in the contingency and sheer luck of biology and geography. The debate over out of Asia or out of Africa is more than just paleontology. It's a testament to the power of new knowledge to force us to revise our deepest philosophical assumptions about who we are. Part 7. The bigger picture. The Yunxian two-skull isn't just about rewriting textbooks or moving a timeline back a few 100,000 years. It's about understanding that our story, the human story, is one of incredible complexity and diversity. We didn't come from one place, we came from many places. Our ancestors didn't evolve in a simple line. They branched and rebranched and intermingled across continents. We're the product of millions of years of adaptation, migration, meeting and mixing. So when a scientist holds up a crushed skull, scans it with machines and tells us that we need to rethink our entire origin story, we should feel grateful, not frustrated, not threatened, grateful. Because we're getting closer to understanding the truth, and the truth, even when it's complicated and messy, is always more interesting than the simple stories we make up.